So, welcome to Coffee with Joe for Sunday, December 11th, 2011.
Hey,
Happy
Pete. How you doing?
holidays, Joe.
Hey, thank you, Pete.
The Occupy Wall Street movement is being swept away back into the corners where it came from for the winter. The forces that created it don't seem to be going away or getting any weaker. Joe, I know you want to dig into fractional reserve banking because there's a big controversy about whether fractional reserve banking is the root cause of our financial malaise and
Yes.
our gross inequality of wealth that we have in this country. Even conscience of a liberal economist, Paul Krugman, wrote an article in October that was critical of Ron Paulist thinking about money, critical of people who are for full reserve banking. You don't have to be a Ron Paulist to be for full reserve banking. But
Right.
Krugman leaves with a final jab. Let me add that the fractional reserve thing exhibits a characteristic common to a lot of what I see in the Paulist camp. They have an oddly antiquated notion of what money and finance are about, one that misses the virtualness of the modern world. They still think of money as being pieces of green paper rather than what it mostly is now, zeros and ones on some server somewhere.
The whole body of his thing, before he gets into that last quote at the end, Pete, is theoretically based on. He says this way of thinking is not correct. He based his whole thing on this study, and he puts a link in his comment to the study.
Diamond
Never.
Dybvig.
Yes,
Diamond
the Diamond
Dybvig.
Dybvig. Yes, that study, and I put this out there to Paul Krugman right now, right here in his face, if I could, Pete. It never mentions fractional reserve banking. It's really a study about banking. Fractional reserve banking never comes into it. It's like how banking has changed, you know. And so what? That study was done. I'm pretty sure back in the '80s originally, although there have been updates, refers to it. So what? Oh, that was our understanding of banking and finance, before the crash. We've had the crash. We've had all the results of the crash. And these people are out there complaining about the results, these results. So what does he really have to say? He tries to equate, and he claiming some kind of a progressive mantle, Pete. He tries to equate people who are opposed to fractional reserve banking in this populist progressive tradition of being opposed to fractional reserve banking, private wealth creation by individuals of the nation's money system. He tries to equate that with Ron Paul's notion of ending the Fed and like a free banking, type of an alternative, getting the government completely out of money. When if you take a look at either the progressive P, this is a good part of this, the progressive platform, 1912. It's 1912, just the year before, is when they were running against Wilson, etc. They were opposed to the Aldrich bill. They wanted the government to have control of the money. So the progressive, popular, and La Follette, being part of that populist movement, they were all in favor of the government controlling the money supply, Pete, the issuance of money, Pete. Okay, so for a guy like Krugman, who he claims to be some kind of a progressive, he's just tied completely into it, and it was a real disservice. That's what really gets me about it. It's a real disservice to that populist movement that Occupy Wall Street really represents, Pete.
Bernie Sanders has assembled a group of the finest minds on the left side of the economic spectrum, Joe. But it looks like they're still not seeing outside the paradigm of there being a Federal Reserve, a private central bank.
Bernie, when you get them all in a room, ask them this one question: do we have to create our money as a debt or not? See what they have to say. You know, don't start out with, well, the problem with the Fed is that it's too concentrated in Wall Street. We need to put power out into the hinterlands. Because as if that's the problem. That's the solution that's going to solve the problem of the Fed, Pete. No, what we have there is just another example, Pete, of the I call it the liberal speak for when it comes to money, and so look, Pete, it's a separate from the progressive speak. I want to say that. I want to challenge it all out there. There are MMTers on there. They claim to be progressives, Pete. They're not progressives. Okay, they're not progressive. They have no progressive way of thinking about money. You know, their way of thinking about money is rooted in those for whom debts and credits are the way of life. Okay, and so they have no connection whatsoever to any aspect. Whereas, if you take a look even at somebody like excuse me, Teddy Roosevelt, you know, could see that the coming proposal to create money by the private, bankers was going to be the ruin of the country. So that's all wrong. But that again, it's just indicative of Bernie in the company of Congress. They always say that ultimate power corrupts. I don't hold that true for Bernie. I don't hold that true for Bernie. To me, Bernie is still a real person, and he still has the ability to be real and to get real on this stuff because he's over there in Congress with mostly the one percenters. Bernie's up there with the one percenters, and he knows that he has to deal with those one percenters in order to excuse me, in order to get his thing passed. So Pete, I always said, the one of the originators of the thoughts of progressive ideas of applying, Pete, science to the money system was Nobelist Frederick Soddy. Nobelist Frederick Soddy, who has written here in this lecture that he gave when he was at, I'm pretty sure, the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, Pete, on Cartesian economics, the bearing of physical science, again, being a scientist and applying science to what the government should be doing, is the bearing of physical science upon state stewardship. His in this lecture, Pete.
What
And
year would this be?
that lecture was done November of 1921. I think the year that he won the Nobel Prize, Pete, in chemistry. But he makes this incredible statement, Pete, and here I want to try and tie into the leaderless Occupy Wall Street movement, Pete. Priding themselves on somewhat on being leaderless, and yet needing to find an agenda, Pete, that moves it forward and takes it into the Congress. That that this is what Sadi said when he was trying to understand why the government resorted to this private debt-based money system. It's what he said in that lecture. One sentence: we have in the orthodox politicians an association of the function of government almost entirely with those who live by rent, by interest and profit, and thus take from rather than contribute to the revenue of the wealth of the community. A further justification for the view already expressed that the community in its struggle for existence resembles an army officered almost entirely by the enemy. Pete, among the group of economists gathered by Bernie, okay, uh, there's there's a they've all been to the same school, Pete. The one business school that tells you, well, if you get into money, don't get into public money. There's nothing there. There's nothing there. There's no degree there. There's no school there. There's no school to go teach it in, Pete. Public money. Where can anybody go to learn about public money? You know, so the concept of public money has to be started out here from the ground up. Congressman Kucinich has a bill in there to restore public money. Public purpose money, a money system issued of by and for the people, but it's gone. But it's not. It's not supported. And
It's
Bernie's
not.
group,
It's not
yeah,
being looked at by Bernie's group. I mean, wouldn't that be great to have them study it and review it?
absolutely, Pete, absolutely, because it would force them to answer the question: do we need? Is there a need? Especially using Saudi, is there a scientific basis for using debt to create our money as the vehicle to create our money? Or can we produce money to provide the means of exchange in the economy without producing debt? And then, let it go and be loaned. So this whole thing about fractional reserve banking, Krugman, the quasi-progressive, really quasi-liberal, I guess he calls himself a liberal, um, does nothing to change the system, Pete.
We'll dive into more detail in the future on that. We're about out of time for today.
All right, Pete.
Okay, Joe.
Thanks, Ben.
Have a good week. We'll see you.